I still can't believe it. Even now, years later, the sheer audacity, the intricate web of lies, the betrayal, it all feels like a punch to the gut. My father, a decorated military man, a hero in my eyes, left me an inheritance that wasn't money, wasn't property, but a secret so profound, so devastating, it shattered every perception I had of him, of my family, and of myself. Was I wrong to dig deeper? Was I wrong to expose the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the carefully constructed facade of our lives? Tell me honestly if you would have done the same thing. My story, or rather, my father's story, began long before I was born. My dad, Arthur Vance, was a man carved from granite. He was a Marine, through and through, from his ramrod's straight posture to his unwavering gaze. He'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, came back with medals, scars, and a quiet intensity that always made me feel both safe and a little intimidated. He met my mother, Elena, a vibrant, kind woman who, in many ways, was his complete opposite, shortly after he returned. Their love story, as I understood it, was a classic. The stoic war hero swept off his feet by the beautiful, gentle nurse. They married, had me, and built a life that, from the outside, appeared idyllic. We lived in a small, quiet town, surrounded by good neighbors, and our home was always filled with the scent of my mother's baking and the low hum of my father's classic rock music. He was a strict but fair dad, instilling in me a sense of discipline and responsibility, traits he believed were essential for any successful life. He taught me how to fish, how to change a tire, and how to stand up for myself. My mother, on the other hand, taught me compassion, empathy, and the importance of a good book. I was, in essence, a blend of their best qualities, or so I thought. My father was a creature of habit. Every morning, without fail, he'd be up before dawn, running his 5 miles. Every evening, he'd sit in his armchair, reading the newspaper, a cup of black coffee by his side. And every Sunday, we'd have our family dinner, a tradition I cherished deeply. He rarely spoke about his time in the military, beyond the occasional anecdote about camaraderie or a particularly harrowing mission that he'd gloss over quickly. He'd always say, "Some things are best left in the past, son." I respected that. I understood that war left scars, not just visible ones, and I never pressed him. I simply admired him for his service, for his stoicism, for being the rock of our family. He retired early from the Marines, taking up a job as a security consultant, which he did until his passing. His health had been declining for a few years, a culmination of old injuries and a quiet, stubborn refusal to fully acknowledge his own mortality. When he finally succumbed to a heart attack at 68, it was sudden, yet not entirely unexpected. The grief was immense. My mother was devastated, and I felt a profound emptiness, a void where my guiding force used to be. The funeral was a blur of respectful salutes, tearful condolences, and stories from his old Marine buddies about his bravery and loyalty. It was a testament to the man I knew, the hero. After the initial wave of grief subsided, my mother and I began the arduous task of going through his belongings. It was a bittersweet process, each item a memory, a tangible piece of the man we loved. His old uniform, meticulously folded in a cedar chest, his worn fishing hat, his collection of classic rock vinyls. Then we found it, tucked away at the bottom of a locked strongbox, beneath a stack of old letters and financial documents, was a small, unassuming wooden box. It wasn't fancy, just a simple, unadorned box, but it felt heavy, not just in weight, but in significance. My mother looked at me, her eyes clouded with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "I've never seen this before. she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. We opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single tarnished silver locket. It was old, clearly well worn, and bore no inscription. Next to it was a photograph, a small, black and white image, faded with time. It showed my father, much younger, in his military uniform, smiling broadly. Beside him, her arm linked through his, was a woman I had never seen before. She was beautiful, with long, dark hair and eyes that sparkled even in the grainy photo. And in her arms, cradled gently, was a baby with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were undeniably familiar. My heart began to pound. It couldn't be, but the resemblance the baby looked exactly like me when I was an infant. My mother gasped, a small, choked sound. Who is this?" She whispered, her gaze fixed on the woman in the photo. My father had never mentioned another woman, let alone a child. Our family history, as I understood it, began with my parents. This was a complete anomaly, a crack in the granite. My mother, bless her heart, tried to rationalize it. "Maybe it's an old friend from the war, and her child," she suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. But the way my father was looking at the woman in the photograph, the tenderness in his smile, it wasn't just friendly. And the baby's features were too similar to mine, too similar to my father's. The shock slowly morphed into a chilling certainty, a dread that began to seep into my bones. This wasn't an old friend. This was something far more significant, far more personal. I looked at the locket again, turning it over in my hand. It was heavier than it looked. With a faint click, it sprung open. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded picture of the same woman from the photograph. On the other, etched delicately, were two words, "My Elena." Elena, not Eleanor, not my mother. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. My mother sank onto the nearby armchair, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Elena," she repeated, the name tasting foreign and bitter on her tongue. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of a betrayal that spanned decades. I knew with an agonizing certainty that this was the secret my father had kept. This was the inheritance he hadn't intended for me to find, but now, here it was, laid bare. It wasn't about money or property. It was about the truth, about the hidden life of the man I thought I knew. I had to find out who Elena was, who the child was. I owed it to myself, to my mother, and even, strangely, to my father, to understand the depth of this deception. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard determination. I needed answers. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Here I was, holding the remnants of a shattered illusion, a secret that had been buried for half a century, unearthed by pure chance. My mother was reeling, her world, like mine, turned upside down. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have closed the box, tucked it away, and tried to forget? Or would you have, like me, felt an irresistible pull to uncover the full, brutal truth, no matter the cost? I couldn't just leave it. The image of the baby, the name Elena, it gnawed at me. My father, the paragon of honesty and integrity, had lived a lie. I began my research, starting with the military records. It was tedious, frustrating work, but I was driven by an almost obsessive need for clarity. I eventually tracked down his old service unit, cold, calling veterans until I found one who remembered my father from his first tour in Vietnam. Sergeant Miller, an elderly man with a raspy voice and a sharp memory, was initially hesitant. But when I mentioned the name Elena and the faint details of a certain village, something shifted in his tone. He confirmed my darkest fears. My father had been stationed in a remote village during his first tour. He had fallen in love with a local woman named Elena. She had been a translator, resourceful and kind, and their bond had been forged in the crucible of war. And yes, they had a child together, a son, born just a few months before my father's first tour ended. Sergeant Miller described my father as being utterly smitten, torn between his duty and his love. He had wanted to stay, to build a life with Elena and their son. But the war, the harsh realities of the conflict, and the immense pressure from his superiors to return home and fulfill his commitments had forced his hand. He had been ordered back to the States, and despite his pleas and promises to return, the communication had been severed. Elena and the baby were left behind, lost in the chaos of a country at war. My father, according to Sergeant Miller, had been heartbroken, a shadow of his former self when he returned. He had tried to find them, sending letters, pulling strings, but the war zone made it impossible. Eventually, he'd given up, believing them lost to the ravages of conflict. He'd met my mother shortly after, tried to move on, to build a new life, a new family, but the guilt, the memory of Elena and his firstborn son, had never truly left him. It was a secret he carried to his grave, a silent burden that explained so much of his quiet intensity, his moments of introspection. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My father hadn't just had an affair. He had a whole other family, a son, my half-brother, somewhere out there. And my mother, my poor mother, who had loved him so completely, so faithfully, had been living with this unspoken truth for decades. The anger, the grief, the profound sense of deception, it was overwhelming. I struggled with what to do next. Do I tell my mother? Do I search for my half-brother? The thought of revealing this to her, shattering her image of my father, broke my heart. But the thought of keeping it from her, of continuing the lie, felt equally unbearable. I knew I couldn't keep it secret. My mother deserved the truth, however painful it might be. I sat her down, the wooden box with the locket and the photo placed carefully between us. With a heavy heart, I relayed everything Sergeant Miller had told me. I watched as her face drained of color, her eyes welling up with tears that she silently tried to blink away. There was no theatrical outburst, no shouting, just a profound, aching sorrow. She looked at the photograph again, her gaze lingering on Elena's face, then on the baby. "He loved me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know he loved me. But he loved her first, didn't he? And he had a son with her." It was a statement, not a question. The pain in her eyes was unbearable. I tried to console her, to tell her that his love for her was real, that he had built a beautiful life with her. But the shadow of the past, of Elena and the forgotten son, was too long, too dark. The next step was inevitable. I had to find my half-brother. It was a monumental task, made even more difficult by the passage of time and the complexities of searching in a country ravaged by war. But I had a name, Elena, and I had a general location. I hired a private investigator specializing in international searches, providing him with the photo, the name, and the details of my father's unit. The wait was excruciating. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Every phone call, every email sent my heart racing. And then, finally, the call came. He had found them, or rather, he had found her. Elena, she was still alive. And she had indeed raised my half-brother, a man named Linh. I flew to Vietnam, my stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. The meeting was surreal. Elena was an elderly woman now, her face etched with the lines of a life lived through hardship, but her eyes, those same sparkling eyes from the photograph, still held a vibrant spark. She recognized my father instantly from the picture I showed her, her eyes filling with tears. We spoke through a translator, a halting, emotional conversation that spanned decades. She told me of her love for my father, of their plans, of the devastation when he left, believing he would return. She had waited, hoped, for years, but he never came. She had raised Lynn alone, a testament to her strength and resilience. She held no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance of her fate. She knew my father had loved her, and that was enough for her. Then I met Lynn. He was a man in his late 40s, with a kind face and, uncannily, my father's eyes. The resemblance was striking, undeniable. He had grown up knowing his father was an American soldier, but he never knew his name, never knew if he was alive or dead. He had no resentment, only a profound curiosity, a yearning for connection. When I showed him the photograph of my father, his father, a wave of emotion washed over his face. He held the locket, the one with Elena's picture, tracing the etched name, My Elena. It was a moment of profound significance, a bridging of two worlds, two families, separated by war and a lifetime of secrets. We spent days together, talking, sharing stories, piecing together the fractured narrative of our family. He told me about his life, his family, his children. I told him about my father, about my mother, about the life they had built. I returned home, forever changed. The secret my military father hid was no longer a secret. It was a complex, beautiful, and heartbreaking chapter in our family history, finally brought to light. My mother, in time, found a quiet peace with the truth. It didn't diminish her love for my father. It simply added another layer to the man she had loved. She even, eventually, met Elena and Lynn through video calls, a tentative, emotional connection forming between them. The inheritance my father left me wasn't wealth, but understanding. It was the knowledge that life is messy, that people are complex, that love can be found in unexpected places, and that secrets, however well kept, often leave their own indelible mark. It was the inheritance of truth, however painful, and the profound gift of a new family, a half-brother and his children, who were once lost to us, now found. This whole experience taught me that every story has layers, and sometimes the most profound truths are hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. So, what do you think? Was it right to expose the secret, to bring a painful truth to light, even if it meant disrupting the peace? Like this video, if you were on my side, if you believe that truth, however difficult, is always worth pursuing. Subscribe for more stories like this, stories that delve into the hidden corners of human experience and challenge our perceptions. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.